You see behind me that something different happened this last week. We had VBS. And, here's a couple of folks I think I saw at VBS last week. Hi, guys.
Hello.
Hi, guys.
Hi.
How was VBS last week?
It was great.
Okay. Well, one of you is kind of scary looking. The other one looks friendly, but I don't think I'd want to tangle with the guy with the sword. Anything you want to tell us about VBS?
Yeah, we were here with 1,000 other people.
Not that many. There were 150 kids and 99 volunteers.
Wow.
I was too busy having fun to count them all.
What were you doing?
Crafts and games and singing and eating cookies and listening to stories.
Can you tell me one of your favorite stories?
I liked when my teacher told me about the best plate of rice and fish.
No, it's a breastplate of righteousness. One of the pieces of the armor of God, we learned how God helps us stand firm in the battle for truth.
And I made some new friends. There were several kids who had never been to church before.
Fantastic.
Sure, we can show you pictures of our great week at Keepers of the Kingdom VBS later.
All right, we'll see you next week then. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye. All right, Keepers of the Kingdom, a great theme. And I'm feeling right at home here on stage with this castle and with stained glass windows and with battlements and with swords and shields and flaming arrows. We were on vacation and had the opportunity to visit some castles, some real castles in Europe. And we walked along with these great drawbridges and all these things. And I was speaking at Jared and Ariana's church in London. And I said, Americans are fascinated with castles. There's kind of this romantic notion, right? Ooh, exciting kings and queens and princes and princesses and maybe even a dragon or two somewhere in that. And of course, everybody wants to see the dungeon, right? As Americans, we're fascinated by things that are old. We think 200 years is old, right? The church that I was speaking at, the main building, was about 150 years old, and that's definitely considered new. We were in one castle that was originally built in the 6th century, and so for 1,000 years, this kind of thing has been going on. And as a matter of fact, many of us were intrigued by the coronation of King Charles. Now, as Americans, we don't want to have a king, of course, but 11 million Americans watched the coronation, right? All the pomp, all the circumstance, all the amazing things. I mean, the crown jewels alone. How many of you have seen the crown jewels? They are amazing, just incredible. I mean, we just get kind of sucked into all of that pageantry. The theme of kings and queens is definitely woven in. Kings and kingdom is definitely woven into John 19. So if you haven't turned in your Bible yet to John 19, let me invite you to do that. The title king is used 8 times in this text. This is a story about power, about domination. It's about pressures and position. It's about those you call on for help and those whom you will pledge your life to. The king is one who is intended to protect, but he does it at the cost of requiring our service. So we think about that and we remember Jesus is a king. Look back in John 18. We'll see back in verse 36, my kingdom, Jesus says, is not of this world. Yes, I'm a king, but not on the kind of terms that Pilate was defining. And Pilate writes him off as a deluded, sentimental Galilean who is no threat to Rome. He had no army. He had no followers. He was no competition for Caesar. And so, with a speech laced with sarcasm, Pilate says in 1839, do you want me to release for you the king of the Jews? Almost as a joke. And what that did is it backfired on Pilate, and they say, no, release for us Barabbas, who was a known terrorist. So now, we walk into the story in chapter 19, verse 1, and Pilate is in hot water. He's squirming at this point in time. Why? Because he's got political pressures on him. He's got riot control issues on him. He's got a situation that is spiraling out of control as he's trying to maintain control. Last week we saw that Jesus had been before Herod, he'd been before Annas and Caiaphas, and now we're in the second part of this trial before Pontius Pilate. Now, just a little bit of background for those of you who aren't up on your ancient Roman history. The kingdom of Rome, the Roman Empire, spanned all the way from North Africa to the Middle East to the UK. You can go to London and you can see Roman ruins. You can go to Bath and see, or Bath, and see these leftover vestiges of the extent of the Roman Empire. The last king in Israel had been King Herod the Great. Matthew chapter 2, we were reminded of his paranoia in that position when he heard from the wise men about one who would be born king of the Jews. And so he resorts to the slaughter of the innocent children in that region before, in that time. In 6 BC, a revolt erupted in Judea, and the Roman Empire, who had had a kind of a hands-off approach to Judea prior to that, came in and crushed the rebellion. 2,000 rebels were crucified in one day in Jerusalem. The Emperor Augustus brought Judea under strict Roman administration and control and installed these governors. And so Pilate was the 5th one of these governors to rule there. He was constantly getting in trouble with Rome. So historians say he was an inept ruler. He was brutal with atrocities against the Jewish people. He hated them, and they hated him back. Luke mentions an episode where Pilate slaughters some Galilean Jews and mingles their blood with the blood of their sacrifices. Later, he would stand trial in Rome for his cruelty and oppression to the Jewish people. Secular historians like Josephus, philosopher Philo of Alexandria say this, his, quote, his venality, his violence, his thefts, his assaults, his abusive behavior, his frequent execution of untried prisoners, and his endless savage ferocity. That's Pontius Pilate. We may have gotten a different view of him after reading this passage. And so my question was, if that's the kind of guy this is like, then what was motivating him? Max showed us last week from the passage in chapter 18, verse 38. He certainly wasn't motivated by the truth. History tells us he had no problem executing untried prisoners. I believe his driving motivation was his hatred for the Jews. They wanted Jesus to be killed, and Pilate wanted to deny them what they wanted. If somebody could get me a glass of water, that would be great. Thank you, Darren. What's going on in front of us in John 19 is a power struggle. It's about manipulation and conniving. The Jews have a seething hatred for Pilate and for Rome, his pagan idol worship, the occupying armies, the taxation, but they are willing to sell their souls to use his power to get what they want. John 19 is a story of tragedy, not just the story of an innocent man being killed without justice. No, it's a story of human blindness in the midst of a raging battle. The blindness of the Pharisees, as Anna said, of the Jews, of the crowds, of the soldiers. And yet Jesus remains unflustered. Thank you, Darren. What else was motivating Herod? Well, clearly his political survival was on the line. The emperor at the time was Tiberius. Pliny the Elder called him the gloomiest of men. He was a ruler who never really wanted to be emperor. He was paranoid. He was constantly in trouble with the Roman Senate. So this is the environment that Pilate is working in. Bad reports about Pilate had already been sent to Rome. One other might end his career and possibly his life. Now, we're going to see the trial of Jesus in 7 stages. Last week, we saw the first 3. The first stage, after meeting with Annas and Caiaphas, where Pilate says what accusations have been brought. The second, where the conversation with Jesus about, are you a king? And the third, Pilate has outside the praetorium, I find no grounds at all for the charges in this case. Remember, the Jews wouldn't go into Pilate's house. They didn't want to become unclean. So this happens inside and outside. We go back and forth between the two. If you're following along in your notes, my first point this morning is Pilate is gambling and Jesus is humiliated. Pilate is gambling and Jesus is humiliated. 19:1. So Pilate then took Jesus and had him flogged. Now that's a technical term. There were 3 levels of flogging in ancient Roman world. The first one was more of a warning, done with rods. It would be done publicly to humiliate the criminal, but it was also more of a warning. The second one had a more severe punishment and was done with rods and whips. And the third level was the scourging described in Mark 15, and we'll look at that next week. I happen to believe that Jesus received the first or second level warning here. Why? Because Pilate was just trying to bargain with the Jews. He was trying to get Jesus off. Look at verse 2. And the soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and placed it on his head and put a purple cloak on him. And they repeatedly came up to him and said, "Hail, King of the Jews," and slapped him in the face again and again. Here Jesus is being mocked. Instead of being coronated, instead of a royal coronation, Jesus is where he was crowned and honored. He's being humiliated. This is some fun the soldiers are having. Imagine, yet another crucifixion, yet another flogging. How am I going to spice this up a little bit? Well, they had heard the conversation between Pilate, and then Jesus said, "Yes, I'm a king." So they said, "Oh, this will be fun. Let's treat this criminal like a king." They probably took one of the soldiers' cloaks, probably wove some thorns into a crude crown, and mocked him with "Hail," something that would have been reserved for Caesar. Mark 15:19 tells us they took a reed for a scepter and beat him about the head, painfully driving the thorns into the crown, into his skull. This scene is so typical of the book of John, isn't it? Can you remember other times where the truth for those who would see was plain, and yet the audience it was intended for missed it again and again and again? The woman at the well with Nicodemus, and here now before all these people where Jesus' kingship, we've looked at him for 19 chapters. They had all the evidence before them, and yet they were blinded. They were blinded. The climax of the irony that Jesus is being missed is nowhere higher than in this scene. Look at verse 4. And then Pilate came out again and said to them, "See, I'm bringing him out to you, so you'll know I find no grounds for all the charges in his case." And Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and purple robe, and Pilate said to them, "Behold the man." Now we're in our fifth scene. We've gone back outside again. And Pilate is for the second time now saying, "I find no grounds for the charges against him." Well, what were those charges? Well, we can just do a quick survey and find at least 6. Threatening to destroy the temple, being a quote-unquote criminal, whatever that means, perverting the nation, forbidding to give tribute to Caesar, which he didn't really do, stirring up all the people, and being a king. But Pilate isn't convinced. Pilate says, "Nah, it's not sticking. I'm not seeing that happen here." Again, with an underlying motivation to not give the Jews what they wanted. Jesus is bruised, he's bleeding, he's humiliated. Pilate thinks, that'll be enough. They'll look on this pathetic, quote-unquote king and say, okay, let's let him go. But it doesn't work. At this point, Pilate has so many pressures on him. Let's take a look just for a minute. Here's Pilate in the inner circle. He's got a jeering crowd on the edge of riot. He's got the Sanhedrin, the ruling leaders of the Jewish nation. He's got the specter of Caesar hanging over top of him. He's got the truth, or maybe his own conscience, which he has somehow dismissed. And Matthew 27 tells us he's got his wife telling him, "I had a dream about this guy. I have nothing to do with him." Now that's pressure. This guy's got so much happening to him at this time. What is he going to do? Look at point number 2. Pilate is afraid, and Jesus is silent. So when the chief priests and officers saw him, verse 6 says, they shouted, "Crucify, crucify." And Pilate said to him, "Take him yourselves and crucify him." Again, third time, "for I find no grounds for the charges in his case." Pilate is getting ridiculous. Pilate is getting desperate. Now he's suggesting something that would be illegal. And the Jews say to him, "We have a law, and by that law he ought to die because he made himself out to be the Son of God." Now we get to the 7th charge against Jesus, and this one has a little more weight to it. This had been the main concern of the Jews all along about Jesus. We saw clear back in John chapter 5. Would you read this out loud with me? "For this reason, therefore, the Jews were seeking all the more to kill him." Why? Because he was not only breaking the Sabbath, but also was calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. This was it. They were blaspheming. They accused him of blasphemy. Now, the penalty for blasphemy under the law of Moses was death. Leviticus 24:16 says this, "Moreover, the one who blasphemed the name of the Lord must be put to death. All the congregation shall certainly stone him." But as Max pointed out last week, the Jews weren't interested simply in killing Jesus. They wanted him cursed. They wanted him put on a tree. They wanted him hung and put in publicly displayed in a way that would humiliate him and curse him. Now, Pilate hears this, and it says, underline this, more afraid. So he's already afraid. His political career is on the line. He's already being pressured by that area from Caesar, and now it says he's more so. Why? Well, superstition and views of the gods was common in those days. And I believe Pilate is looking at this and going, well, maybe there is something to this guy. Maybe he really is some kind of a holy man. So add this to our diagram of Pilate's pressures. Now he's got superstition. Wow, am I going to be in trouble? Am I going to get sent to the underworld or whatever's going on in his mind? And this explains why Pilate asked him where he's from. And I don't think this was like, "Hey, how you doing? Where are you from?" This was like, "Jesus, where exactly did you say you came from?" Right? What was your origin? And what does Jesus do? Jesus ignores him. Jesus had ignored Herod. Jesus had ignored Caiaphas, and now he ignores Pilate. Why? Because he knows that Pilate isn't really interested in the truth. Verse 10. So Pilate says, "Are you not speaking to me? Do you not know that I have authority to release you and I have authority to crucify you?" So my third point, Pilate is humbled and Jesus is in control. Pilate is humbled and Jesus is in control. Our sixth stage, we're back inside again. Jesus' silence undoubtedly increased Pilate's uneasiness. So he's now thinking, I've got a choice here. I can respect this and back off, or I can double down. Well, Pilate chooses the latter. He doubles down on his threat and intimidation routine. Do you not know I have authority to release you? I have authority to crucify you? Pilate is basically saying, look, bud, I'm above the law. I am the law. I can do with you whatever I jolly well decide to do. It doesn't matter. Right or wrong doesn't matter. Guilty or innocent doesn't matter. Truth or lies don't matter. I'm the one who has the power. And Jesus answered him and says, you would have no authority over me if it had not been given to you from above. Jesus informs Pilate that the authority that he has been given to him by God. Pilate, you're only where you are is because God intends you to be there. Now, sometimes we get the mistaken notion that Jesus is the victim here, that Jesus was surprised. This is his hour. This is his moment. This is what he came to earth to do. John 18, verse 4, in the garden, Jesus says, Jesus, therefore, knowing all things that were coming upon him. This is not a surprise. This is not a crisis moment. Jesus is totally in control. Pilate is acting under the authority that God has given him. In fact, Pilate has been given all that he has that go along with this authority by God. He doesn't recognize it? No way. Romans 13:1 says, there is no authority except from God, and those have been instituted by God. So there's a plan, there's a sovereign plan that God has in motion that is rolling forward according to his sovereign decree. Then verse 11b, it says, for this reason, the one who handed me over to you has the greater sin. Maybe Jesus sees the difference, that Pilate is at least trying to do the right thing for whatever reason. But the persons that are driving this injustice are the Sanhedrin and Caiaphas and the Jewish people. They have the greater sin and are the ones responsible for Christ's death. And then verse 12, as a result of this, Pilate made efforts to release him. Literally translated, kept trying to release him. But the Jews shouted, if you release this man, you are not a friend of Caesar. Everyone who makes himself out to be a king opposes Caesar. The Jews, in their last desperate effort, resort to political hardball. They pull out the atomic weapon, if you will. This phrase, friend of Caesar, was an official title bestowed on someone who had stood for their loyalty and sacrifice to Rome. The environment was that if you weren't a friend of Caesar, then you were probably an enemy. And Tiberius was famous known for eliminating his enemies quickly. So when Pilate said, what is truth? I don't think he was dismissing that there was an objective reality. I think where Pilate was in this moment, in this crisis moment, is that in light of the other pressures I'm under, what else can I do? Right or wrong, if it is even clear, will cost me too much. Some commentators suggest that this is the point where Pilate washes his hands. Again, backpedaling and trying to get out of any responsibility for the death of an innocent man, Matthew 27:24. Now, when Pilate saw that he was accomplishing nothing, but rather that a riot was starting, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd. Look at the depth of this now. I am innocent of this man's blood. You yourselves see. And verse 25 is tragic. And all the people replied, his blood shall be on us and on our children. Now things move quickly. Verse 13, Pilate heard these words. He brought Jesus out, sat down at the judgment seat at a place called the Pavement, but in Hebrew, Gabbatha. Oh, Darren, thank you. Your lifesaver. Verse 13. Yeah, there it is. The judgment seat, or Bema seat, was a place where a powerful ruler would pronounce the official verdict of Roman culture. Pilate had his chair of judgment placed in a piece of courtyard known as the Pavement. Archaeologists have debated. They think they found it. They haven't found it. We don't really know. For those of us who know how this story ends, the irony increases. Here's the King of all kings and Lord of all lords, and the one who will judge each man and woman according to their deeds. 2 Corinthians 5:10 says, being judged at the Bema seat. The heart of God in this moment, the humility required by our Savior in this moment is nothing short of breathtaking. Verse 14 says, now is the day of preparation for the Passover, about the 6th hour. And he said to the Jews, look at your king. The day of preparation means it's Friday. And Pilate gets one more dig in at the Jews, and he says, here's your king. And look how they respond in verse 15. So they shouted, away with him, crucify him. And Pilate said again, shall I crucify your king? And the chief priest answered, we have no king but Caesar. The chief priests have fallen off the deep end. The heartbreaking reality of the darkness of the Jewish leaders is fully seen. One commentator says this, by rejecting Jesus, they rejected God himself. Judaism's high priests and leaders abandoned all pretense of devotion to God and decided to conspire with the military arm of the pagan Roman government. Their pursuit of pragmatic goals made them unable to discern between a terrorist and a good shepherd, the statue of Tiberius and the God of Abraham. They violated every single tenet of their relationship with the God of Abraham. And verse 15 then says, so he handed him over to them to be crucified. We'll look at that next week. Jesus is the true and hidden king. This is his hour of glory, but not by rising up, but not by putting expensive robes, but not by pomp and circumstance, but by submitting himself to the Father's will. The plan to die, a sinless sacrifice for all humanity. That's the kind of king he is. That's the kind of kingdom that he reigns in. It's this coronation ushers his kingdom to a new level where death becomes victory, where dying is the path to greatness. Friends, this is so much more than a story about an innocent man dying without justice. It's the story of religious people sacrificing their souls for self-preservation, for self-comfort, and for power. Their ability to manipulate Scripture, circumstances, and people to their own ends. It's a warning for us about power and how we choose to respond to it and how we choose to use it. It's a story of kings and kingdoms, who we obey and who we serve. So let me make a couple of observations as we try to bring some application. Number one is everyone has power. You have influence. You have resources. You say, are you kidding? I got nothing. But it's not true. You're here today. You made a decision to come here today. You say, what's the most helpless, being on the face of the earth. It's a tiny baby, isn't it? But when a child cries, that's powerful, especially for the parents. The power of a tiny baby over a room full of people who will do ridiculous things before a baby, even if they're asleep. The power is not what we think it is. We all have power, some more, some less. You have your thoughts, you have your resources and time and money, you have relationship, you have influence. Some of you have positions, some of you have platforms, some of you have physical strength more than others. You have experiences and personality and skill and passions, all resources given to you, get this now, by God, and you can exert them and have influence. You make decisions. You have a body. You have finances. Maybe not a lot, maybe a lot. You have time. You have relationships. SHAPE stands here at Valley Church for spiritual gifts, heart, abilities, personality, experiences. All those are things given to you by God. You have power. 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 7 says, what do you have that God hasn't given you? And if everything God you have is from God, why boast as it's not a gift? God has given you those things for a reason. So my question is, what resources, influence, and power do you have that is given to you by God? You have relationships. You have abilities. What are those? There's a little space in your notes to do that. Now, secondly, everyone has pressures. My pressures aren't the same as your pressures. Maybe there's a crowd around you, like that was around Pilate, and there's pressures coming at you. There's influence. There's messages. There's a culture that surrounds us that exerts influence on us 24/7. Maybe you have an employer that's putting influence in you. Maybe there's messages that are calling themselves truth, whether they are or not. You have relationships that are putting pressure on you. Just like Pilate, all of us have these influences. And I know for certain that there are times in your life, probably times every day, where you feel stuck between these pressures. What was it for Pilate? It was either let this innocent man go and stick it to the Jews or get in trouble from Caesar. What did he choose? I'm going to defer to Caesar. I don't want to get in trouble. I'm going to preserve my own hide. You get put in cases just like that. Sometimes these choices are easy. It's black or white, good or bad, right versus wrong. But many times it's much more complex. It's a matter of degree. It's a matter of being good or better, bad or worse. Some of these influences that come our way are good. You hear the Bible or a sermon, or you're exposed to God's truth, but you also hear lies that are presented as truths. Look at this fascinating verse in the book of James, chapter 3, verse 14 through 17. James was warning the hearers, if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your heart, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Listen now, such quote-unquote wisdom does not come down from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, and demonic. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice. But wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy, good fruit, and impartial and sincere. You see, we've got two things both called wisdom that are coming into your life. Which of those will you allow to rule? What pressures are you under? Where are you feeling the pinch? I had a guy say to me one day, Kurt, I can't be a good dad and work where I work. Those are incompatible places. That's real life pressure. That's complex. Third, everyone has options. And this is where there's hope. So here's your pressure. No, sorry. So here are the options. Colossians 1, 13 and 14. Read this out loud with me. For he rescued us from the domain of darkness and transferred us to the kingdom of his beloved Son, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. Isn't that a great message? That we have these pressures and we have these inputs and we have these resources, and here's you with the pressures that are on you, and here's you with these resources that you have to make decisions about every day, about how to use, about who to listen to, about who to appeal to for power, about how to use your power. And the question is, are you going to be a part of the kingdom of God or the kingdom of darkness? We just saw that there in Colossians 1:13. We've been transferred out of this one kingdom and into another. There are fortresses, there are battles, there are warriors, there are weapons of warfare raging in an epic battle around you today, in this world today, and you have a choice. Which king am I going to serve? Which kingdom am I going to appeal to for power, like the Jews did? And who am I going to put my power behind? Whatever else you want to put in that kingdom of darkness, you want to say, well, I put myself, the kingdom of self. The scriptures say in 2 Corinthians 4:4 that kingdom is run by the god of this world, the demonic force known as Satan. And so here's the question, who are you going to serve? Bob Dylan once upon a time said, it may be the devil or it may be the Lord, but you got to serve someone. Jesus put it this way, Matthew 6:24, no one can serve two masters. You cannot love God and wealth. So you will be faced with this question. Will you pursue pragmatism, self-interest, when you are pressed to make a decision that will cost you? You will face this. You are facing this right now. Will we follow whoever is the most powerful to get what we want? Or will we pay the cost to do what's right according to the orders of our King? So here's the three questions. What powers do you possess have been given to you by God? What pressures are you under? And what options are you considering? Our VBS kids this week were taught to learn to discern. Right? Learn to discern where the message is coming from. Are these from God or are these from the kingdom of darkness? Learn to discern where I'm putting my energy and my effort. Some of you need to start with a simple choice, do good versus do evil. That's a good place to start. Hopefully that'll graduate into want to do good versus want to do evil, right? And then maybe you'll graduate from want to do good to want to do best and not settle for good. This decision does not happen one time. It's a daily decision. I put this quote in your notes. You can look at it later. But C.S. Lewis said this. I thought it was brilliant. Both good and evil increase at compound interest. That's why the little decisions you and I make every day are of such infinite importance. The smallest good act today is the capture of a strategic point from which a few months later you may be able to go on to victories you never dreamed of. An apparent trivial indulgence in lust or anger today is the loss of a ridge or railway line or bridgehead from which the enemy may launch an attack otherwise impossible. Joshua 24:15 says, but as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And he invites us to choose this day whom you will serve. I'm going to invite the worship team to come back up. We're going to sing one more song called Living Hope. Because regardless of where you are on the spectrum, maybe you want to do evil. Maybe that's your first inclination. But you're here and you're listening and there's a small voice that's in you, and the King is beckoning you to come under his rule and reign. And he's a good king. He's a generous and kind and powerful and loving. And friends, there is one day where every knee will bow and every tongue confess him as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Why not make that day today? Not just in one decision, but in 1,000 decisions that you'll be faced with today and tomorrow and the next day. My closing story is this. A touching moment in the coronation was when Prince William bowed in front of his father, holding his hands, and he said this, "I, William, Prince of Wales, pledge my loyalty to you and faith and trust, and I bear unto you as your liegeman of life and limb." I had to look up what liegeman meant. It means my humble servant. I pledge life and limb, whatever it costs, and it will cost, to follow you. Let's pray. Jesus, you are the King. You're the Lord. We bow before you today in our hearts. We pledge ourselves to you. Forgive us for looking to other places for meaning and purpose and power. You've more than supplied everything. Give us courage. Give us wisdom as we learn to discern. As we enter in, help us to worship you now for all you are worth. In Christ's name.